They called him a nobody, a broke janitor with a ruined name. They had no idea what he was quietly building in the shadows for 3 long years. One forgotten hard drive. One night of grief-heavy instinct 3 years earlier. It was about to unravel everything his old friend thought he'd buried forever. The whole town believed the worst about him. His own lawyer just placed the final evidence file on the table. In minutes, everything would change. One recorded phone call. 90 seconds of his old partner's own voice. 3 years of lies collapsing in real time in front of the entire town. They called him a nobody. Today, the truth finally caught up to every single person who ever doubted him. This is how quiet patience wins.
They said Ethan Cole was a nobody, a broke, washed-up single father who mopped floors for a living and had no business raising a daughter alone. They said it in the courthouse hallway loud enough for him to hear. They said it in the comments under the local news article about his case. And on the coldest Tuesday morning of that November, they were about to say it one final time, in front of a judge, in a courtroom that smelled like old paper and cheap coffee, right before every single one of them would be forced to eat those words. If you have ever been counted out, underestimated, or told you weren't enough, stay with this story until the end, because what happens in that courtroom will stay with you for a long time. And if stories about quiet men who come back swinging are the kind of thing you need today, hit that like button and subscribe now, because this channel exists for exactly this kind of justice. 3 years earlier, Ethan Cole had everything a hardworking man could ask for. He co-owned a small but growing engineering firm called Coleman Dynamics with his college best friend, Marcus Doyle. They built precision components for agricultural machinery, the unglamorous kind of work that quietly kept small farms across the state running. Ethan was the hands, the mind behind every design, the man who stayed until midnight testing prototypes while his wife, Sarah, sent him photos of their daughter, Lily, falling asleep on the couch waiting for him. Marcus was the face, the smooth talker who handled clients, contracts, and investors. They had built something real together, brick by brick, late night by late night, and Ethan trusted him the way you'd trust a brother. Ethan and Marcus had met in a community college machine shop class 15 years earlier. 2 broke kids who couldn't afford the 4-year engineering programs their grades qualified them for. Ethan had grown up the son of a mechanic who taught him to read an engine block before he could properly read a chapter book, and there was a kind of quiet, almost meditative joy he found in taking something broken apart piece by piece until he understood exactly why it had failed. Marcus, by contrast, had grown up watching his father lose 2 businesses to bad partnerships and swore he would never let sentiment get in the way of survival again. It should have been a warning sign, in hindsight, how easily Marcus could talk about loyalty and mean something closer to leverage. But hindsight is a luxury grief rarely leaves you enough room to use in the moment, and back then, all Ethan saw was a friend who believed in him enough to bet years of unpaid work on an idea that hadn't earned a single client yet. They built Coleman Dynamics out of a rented garage not much bigger than the one Ethan would eventually store that fateful tackle box in years later, a detail that would strike him as almost cruelly poetic much later on. For the first 2 years, they ate more instant noodles than either of them liked to admit, and slept under their workbenches more nights than they slept in actual beds. When the first real contract came through, a mid-sized farm equipment supplier needing custom gear housings, Ethan remembered Marcus hugging him so hard he nearly knocked over a half-finished prototype, both of them laughing like the world had just cracked open into something better. Sarah had been there that night too, pregnant with Lily, bringing them a cake from the grocery store because it was the only celebration they could afford, and for a few years afterward, that memory was the one Ethan returned to whenever the business grew stressful. The 3 of them, a cheap cake, and the feeling that nothing could touch what they had built together. Then Sarah got sick. It happened fast, the way these things sometimes do. A diagnosis that turned their lives inside out within months. Ethan spent every spare hour at the hospital, holding her hand, learning how to braid Lily's hair in the waiting room because someone had to, and slowly stepping back from the day-to-day running of the company he had built from nothing. He trusted Marcus to hold the fort. That was his first mistake, though he wouldn't understand how big a mistake for a long time. Sarah passed away on a rainy April morning, and Ethan's entire world folded in on itself. He had a 5-year-old daughter who kept asking when Mommy was coming home, a company he had built with his own hands, and a grief so heavy some mornings he could not remember how to breathe normally. He took 2 months away from the office, leaning on Marcus's assurances that everything was fine, that he should focus on Lily and healing, that Marcus had everything under control. What Ethan did not know was that during those same 2 months, Marcus had been quietly rewriting company records, funneling client payments through a shell account, and slowly building a paper trail that pointed in one direction only, toward Ethan. When Ethan finally returned to the office, he found the locks changed. He found his name removed from the business bank accounts. He found Marcus sitting behind what used to be their shared desk, flanked by a lawyer, informing him with a rehearsed sadness in his voice that irregularities had been discovered in the company finances, and that all signs pointed to Ethan having misappropriated funds during his leave of absence. Ethan stood there in stunned silence as the words landed on him like stones. He had just buried his wife. Now his best friend was accusing him of stealing from the very company he built to survive. The accusation spread fast in a town that size. Coleman Dynamics quietly became Doyle Precision Systems within a year, and Marcus told a very convincing story to clients, investors, and eventually to the local press that his former partner had exploited a family tragedy to drain company funds, and that only quick action had saved the business and its employees. No formal charges were ever filed because Marcus was too careful for that, too calculated to leave hard evidence that could be traced cleanly back to Ethan in court. But he didn't need formal charges. He only needed the town to believe the story, and the town believed it completely. Doors closed. Job offers Ethan had lined up evaporated overnight. Old friends stopped calling. Even Sarah's parents, Richard and Diane Whitfield, who had never fully approved of their daughter marrying a mechanic's son instead of someone from their social circle, seized on the rumors like confirmation of everything they had quietly suspected about Ethan all along. Ethan could have fought back immediately. He should have, some might say. But he had a 4-year-old girl who had just lost her mother, no income, a mortgage he could no longer pay, and a legal system that required money he did not have to mount any kind of real defense against a man who now had resources, lawyers, and a spotless public reputation. So Ethan did the only thing he could do. He sold the house. He moved himself and Lily into a small 2-bedroom apartment above a hardware store on the edge of town. And he took the only job that would let him control his own hours enough to be the father Lily needed. Janitorial and maintenance work at the very courthouse where, unbeknownst to him then, his future would eventually be decided. For 3 years, Ethan Cole pushed a mop down marble hallways during the day and picked Lily up from school every afternoon without fail. He packed her lunches with little notes tucked inside. He learned to do a passable version of the braids Sarah used to do, though he never quite mastered the ribbon at the end. People in town looked at him with a mixture of pity and quiet judgment. The whispers followed him everywhere. There goes the guy who stole from his own company. Imagine how he raises that little girl on a janitor's paycheck. Some men just aren't built for more than mediocrity. Ethan heard every word. He said nothing. He kept mopping. He kept braiding hair badly. He kept showing up. What almost nobody knew, what Ethan told absolutely no one, not even his own lawyer at first, was that in those final frantic weeks before Marcus changed the locks, some instinct, call it a gut feeling, call it the quiet paranoia of a grieving man who noticed one number in a spreadsheet that didn't sit right, had made Ethan do something small but enormous. He had copied the entire company's server onto an external drive one exhausted night after visiting hours ended at the hospital before Sarah passed, back when he still had access to everything. He hadn't known why he did it at the time. He told himself it was just a backup, just in case. He had tucked that drive into an old tackle box in his garage and forgotten about it for months, buried under grief too heavy to think clearly through. It was Lily, oddly enough, who reminded him it existed. One evening, nearly 2 years into their new life, she asked her father to help her with a school project about things that protect people, and rummaging through the garage for supplies, Ethan's hand closed around that old tackle box. He sat on the concrete floor of that rented garage space for hours that night, plugging the drive into an old laptop, watching time-stamped files load one after another. Emails, invoice records, bank transfer logs, A conversation thread between Marcus and a numbered account he did not recognize. It was all there, preserved exactly as it existed the day before everything fell apart, completely untouched by whatever Marcus had rewritten afterward. Ethan did not run to a lawyer that night. He was smart enough and hurt enough to know that Marcus had powerful friends, an expensive legal team, and 3 years of carefully built reputation standing between him and any easy victory. So instead, Ethan spent the next year quietly, patiently building something Marcus never saw coming, an airtight case. He worked with a young forensic accountant named Priya Anand, a former client of Coleman Dynamics who had also grown suspicious of Marcus over the years, and who agreed to help pro bono after hearing Ethan's story. Together, late at night after Lily was asleep, they traced every transaction, cross-referenced every timestamp, and built a timeline so precise it could not be argued with, only confirmed. Ethan never once let his anger show in public. He never confronted Marcus. He never told the town what he had. He simply kept mopping floors, kept picking Lily up from school, and kept building his case one confirmed detail at a time, driven by something colder and steadier than rage, the simple burning need to give his daughter back her father's good name. The custody case was what finally forced everything into the open. Richard and Diane Whitfield, still convinced their late daughter's husband was a disgraced fraud unfit to raise their only grandchild, filed a petition for custody of Lily, citing his financial instability, his damaged reputation, and what their lawyer called a documented pattern of dishonesty in his professional life. They had money, they had a respected family lawyer, and they had 3 years of small-town gossip working in their favor before a single word had been spoken in court. Ethan sat in his rented apartment the night he received the papers, Lily asleep in the next room, and felt something in him go quiet and sharp at the same time. This was not about money anymore, or pride, or even his own name. This was about the one person in the world worth every ounce of dignity he had swallowed for 3 straight years. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in November. In the very courthouse Ethan mopped every single day. Judge Eleanor Voss, a woman known throughout the county for her exacting patience and her complete refusal to be swayed by reputation over evidence, was assigned to the case. The Whitfield's lawyer painted a devastating picture in his opening statement. An unemployed, discredited former business owner living paycheck to paycheck as building custodial staff with no stability to offer a growing child, contrasted against loving, financially secure grandparents who could give Lily everything Ethan could not. Several people in the gallery, longtime townsfolk who had followed the Coleman Dynamics scandal from a distance for years, nodded along. Ethan sat at the defense table in the only suit he owned, hands folded, expression calm, while 3 years of whispered judgment sat behind him in that gallery like a physical weight. His own lawyer, a tired but sharp public defender named James Ruiz, who had taken the case almost as a personal mission after hearing the full story, stood and made his opening statement with quiet confidence that confused everyone in the room, including, for a moment, Ethan himself. He said his client was not merely going to defend his right to raise his daughter. He said his client intended to prove in this very courtroom exactly what happened 3 years ago at Coleman Dynamics and exactly who was responsible. Marcus Doyle, sitting in the gallery as a character witness for the Whitfields, a man now driving a company car worth more than Ethan's entire apartment building, allowed himself a small, confident smile. He had heard this kind of threat before, 3 years of it, and nothing had ever come of it. For the first hour, it seemed like nothing would come of it this time either. The Whitfield's lawyer called witness after witness attesting to Ethan's financial struggles, to the modest apartment, to the whispers around town. Ethan listened to strangers describe his life as a cautionary tale, without once raising his voice or his eyes from the table. Lily, waiting in a family room down the hall with a court-appointed counselor, had no idea her father was quietly holding an entire courtroom's judgment on his shoulders without breaking. Then James Ruiz called Priya Anand to the stand. She walked the court through 18 months of forensic accounting with the calm precision of someone who had checked every number 3 times over. She explained in plain and careful language how the original, untouched company server data recovered from an external drive showed a clear pattern of fund diversion beginning in the exact weeks Ethan had been at his wife's hospital bedside, all of it traceable to logins under Marcus Doyle's private credentials, routed to an account that, upon further investigation, matched the numbered account referenced in emails between Marcus and an undisclosed third party. The gallery went very quiet. Marcus's smile had disappeared entirely. The Whitfield's lawyer objected furiously, calling the evidence unauthenticated, circumstantial, an obvious act of a desperate man fabricating a defense after 3 years of silence. Judge Voss, unmoved by theatrics her entire career, simply asked one question. Had the defense submitted the full, unedited data set with a verified chain of custody for independent forensic review prior to this hearing? James Ruiz answered that they had 2 weeks prior, sealed and time-stamped, exactly as required, and that the court's own appointed technical examiner had confirmed its authenticity that very morning. He then requested that the court open what he called, quite simply, the final evidence file, a single recorded phone call, obtained legally through records Priya had helped trace, in which Marcus Doyle could be heard, in his own voice, instructing an associate to keep Cole's name on everything until the mess settles. He's too broken up over his wife to notice, and if anyone asks, we found the discrepancies after he stepped back. For a long moment, nobody in that courtroom moved. Ethan felt his own pulse in his ears the same way it had pounded 3 years earlier, standing in the office doorway watching Marcus sit behind what used to be their shared desk. Only this time the fear had nowhere left to hide. He was not the man on trial anymore, even though the Whitfield's lawyer had spent an hour trying to make it feel that way. He glanced once toward the small window at the back of the gallery, half expecting to see Lily's face pressed against the glass, the way she used to press it against their apartment window, waiting for him to walk home from work. But of course she was not there. She was down the hall, coloring quietly with a counselor who had no idea what was about to unfold 2 doors away. That thought alone was enough to steady him. This was for her. It had always, only ever, been for her. Judge Voss allowed it to be played in open court. The recording lasted less than 90 seconds. It felt to everyone sitting in that gallery like an hour. Marcus's own voice, calm and casual, discussing how convenient it was that Ethan was too consumed by grief to check the books, filled the silent courtroom from end to end. Diane Whitfield's hand flew to her mouth. Richard Whitfield stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, the color draining slowly from his face as 3 years of certainty crumbled in 90 seconds flat. Marcus Doyle sat frozen in the gallery, every eye in the room slowly turning toward him, the confident posture he had carried into that courtroom collapsing inward like a building losing its foundation all at once. Judge Voss did not raise her voice. She simply set down the file, looked directly at Marcus Doyle, and stated for the record that this recording, combined with the forensic accounting evidence and the original untampered server data, would be forwarded immediately to the district attorney's office for criminal review, and that the custody petition currently before her would be decided based on facts now clearly established rather than reputation built on those facts being false. She looked then toward Ethan Cole and said something that would follow him for the rest of his life, that a man who spent 3 years absorbing public shame in silence, rather than exposing a child to a bitter, uncertain legal battle before he had the proof to protect her fully, was not a man of instability. He was, in her words, exactly the kind of steady the court looked for and rarely found. The custody petition was dismissed within minutes. Richard and Diane Whitfield, stunned and ashamed, did not fight the ruling. Diane, in fact, approached Ethan in the hallway afterward, tears in her eyes, and quietly apologized for 3 years of assumptions she said she would spend the rest of her life trying to make up for, starting with actually getting to know the man who had raised her granddaughter with a dignity she had never once acknowledged. Marcus Doyle was arrested 6 days later, once the district attorney's investigation confirmed everything the forensic report had already laid bare. Doyle Precision Systems collapsed within the month, its clients and investors having read every word of the story that broke across local news within 48 hours. This time with Ethan's name attached not to accusation, but to vindication. Ethan did not throw himself a celebration. He picked Lily up from school that Tuesday afternoon exactly as he did every single day, same time, same corner, same tired but genuine smile when she came running toward him with her backpack half open. She asked him, as they walked home together, why he looked so tired but so happy at the same time. He told her simply that some things take a very long time to fix, and that the most important part was never giving up on fixing them quietly, even when nobody was watching, and even when everyone assumed you weren't even trying. She didn't fully understand it yet, not at 6 years old, but she nodded seriously the way children do when they sense a moment matters more than the words explaining it, and she squeezed his hand a little tighter the rest of the walk home, as if some part of her already knew. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep clutching the stuffed rabbit that had once belonged to her mother, Ethan sat alone at the small kitchen table in their apartment above the hardware store. The same table where he had built an entire case against his oldest friend one quiet evening at a time. Wade did not feel triumphant exactly. He felt something closer to relief mixed with a strange hollow tiredness, the particular exhaustion of a man who had been holding his breath for 3 years and had only just now remembered how to fully let it out. He thought about Sarah, about how she would have handled all of it, and decided, sitting there in that small, dim kitchen, that she would have been proudest not of the courtroom victory itself, but of the fact that Lily had never once gone a single day without her father showing up for her, no matter what the rest of the world was saying about him outside their front door. In the months that followed, Ethan used the small settlement from the resulting civil case, along with renewed interest from former Coleman Dynamics clients who remembered exactly how good his engineering work had once been, to rebuild. He didn't rebuild an empire. He built something smaller and sturdier, a modest workshop bearing his own name this time. No partners, no shortcuts, just Ethan Cole precision, with 3 employees he handpicked personally for their honesty as much as their skill. Priya Anand became his accountant officially, on the books this time. With a proper salary she had more than earned. James Ruiz remained a close friend, occasionally stopping by the workshop just to see how Lily's science fair projects were coming along. People sometimes asked Ethan, in the months that followed, whether he had ever fantasized about revenge during those 3 silent years, whether some part of him had dreamed of watching Marcus dragged out of that courtroom in handcuffs while the whole town gasped. He always answered the same way, that he had stopped wanting revenge somewhere around the 6-month mark, right around the time he realized revenge would have cost him time he could otherwise spend with Lily, and that what replaced it wasn't forgiveness exactly, but something steadier and far more useful, a plain, patient curiosity. He became curious about every transaction, every timestamp, every gap in the story Marcus had told the town. That curiosity was quieter than anger and far more dangerous to the man who had wronged him, because anger burns out and curiosity simply keeps asking one more question until the whole truth is standing in the light. It was curiosity, not vengeance, that kept him awake at that laptop long after Lily had fallen asleep, and it was curiosity that Priya Anand recognized in him instantly, the same hunger to understand a broken system that had first drawn Ethan to engines as a boy. The town that once whispered about the broken janitor with the ruined name eventually stopped whispering altogether, though Ethan noticed, and quietly savored, the particular silence of people who once judged him now going out of their way to say hello. He never gloated. He never brought up the past to those who had doubted him. He simply kept showing up, the same as he always had, except now the version of his life he showed up for finally matched the truth of who he had always been underneath 3 years of unearned shame. Diane Whitfield kept her promise. She started showing up at Lily's school recitals sitting beside Ethan instead of glaring at him from across the auditorium. And eventually, she started bringing over the same kind of grocery store cake Sarah used to bring to the garage all those years ago, though neither of them ever said out loud why that particular cake had become their tradition. Richard took longer to come around, the way proud men often do, but he showed up anyway, quietly fixing the workshop's ancient heater one winter without being asked, and Ethan understood that was as close to an apology as Richard Whitfield was ever going to offer, and let it be enough. Grief, Ethan had learned, rarely resolves itself in one grand gesture. It resolves in small, repeated ones, offered awkwardly, accepted just as awkwardly, until one day nobody quite remembers when the coldness actually thawed. Ethan Cole, precision, grew slowly and honestly over the following years. The exact opposite of everything Doyle Precision Systems had become. Ethan turned down 2 separate buyout offers from larger firms who wanted his name and his growing reputation for reliability, telling both of them the same thing, that he had already learned the hard way what happens when a business grows faster than the trust holding it together. He kept the shop small enough that he still knew the name of every client personally, small enough that he could still leave at 3:15 every single school day without asking anyone's permission. Years later, when Lily was old enough to understand the whole story in full, she asked her father why he never told anyone what he was building, why he let the whole town believe the worst about him for so long instead of shouting the truth from the very first day. Ethan thought about it for a long moment before answering. He told her that shouting the truth without proof would have just sounded like a desperate man making noise, and that some fights are not won by being the loudest voice in the room, but by being the most patient one, the one still standing calmly with the facts in hand long after everyone else has run out of things to say. He told her that being underestimated was, in its own strange way, the greatest gift his enemies ever gave him, because it meant nobody was watching closely enough to notice exactly what he was quietly building until it was already finished. If there is one thing this story leaves behind, it is this. The world will often judge you for the chapter you're stuck in, not the story you're actually writing. People will call you a nobody in hallways and comment sections. They will assume the worst because the worst is easier to believe than patience, and they will move on with their lives, never once wondering what you were building in the quiet hours when nobody bothered to look. Let them. Keep mopping the floor. Keep braiding the hair, even badly. Keep building the case, the workshop, the life, one confirmed detail at a time, and trust that the day will come when the last file finally opens, and every single person who ever doubted you will have no choice but to watch the truth stand up in the room and simply refuse to sit back down. Thank you for watching this story all the way to the end. If it moved you even a little, tell us in the comments what part hit you the hardest. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that quiet patience is still a form of strength. And subscribe to this channel so you never miss the next story about the people the world underestimated right before they proved everyone wrong.